In regards to the Donald Thurman case, the people would expect the evidence to show that the victim in this case, Ruth George, was a 19-year-old sophomore honor roll student attending classes at UIC. She was a member of a professional fraternity for medical track students at the university. The victim did not know the defendant, Donald Thurman. On November 23rd of 2019 at about 1:25 a.m. in the vicinity of 760 West Taylor, the victim and one of her friends, witness number 1, returned to the UIC campus via a Lyft driver after attending a semi-formal event for their professional fraternity. Witness number 1 went to her dorm while the victim walked alone to the UIC parking garage on Halsted, where she had parked her white Kia. The victim walked past the CTA Blue Line UIC stop, and this defendant noticed her. The defendant thought she was pretty and tried talking to her, but the victim ignored him. The defendant was wearing a distinctive white jacket and is seen on video. The victim continued to walk to where her car was parked. The defendant followed the victim and tried to talk to her again, and then the defendant catcalled at her. The victim continued to ignore the defendant and continued walking to where her car was parked. The defendant followed the victim into the parking garage and up to where the victim's car was parked. When the victim arrived at her car, the defendant was angry that he was being ignored. The defendant came up behind the victim, grabbed her around the neck from behind, and put her in a chokehold. The defendant and the victim fell to the ground. With his arms still wrapped around the victim's neck, the defendant dragged the victim from the ground and he opened her back seat car door. The defendant then threw the victim into the back seat of her car. The victim was face down and unconscious. The defendant pulled the victim's pants and undergarments down while she remained unconscious. The defendant then penetrated the victim's vagina with his tongue and then his finger. The defendant put on a condom as well, but he claims that he did not penetrate the victim with his penis. The defendant removed the condom from his penis and left it on the floorboard of the back seat behind the driver's seat. The defendant then left the victim in her vehicle. On November 24th of 2019, the victim's family grew concerned when she did not return home. The victim's sisters had contacted the victim's friends and learned that her cell phone pinged to the above location, the UIC parking garage on Halsted. The victim's sisters requested that the UIC police accompany them to the location. The victim's sisters and UIC police discovered the victim's body in the back seat of her white Kia, where the defendant had left her. The victim was still face down, her pants were pulled down exposing her buttocks, her Spanx were ripped and her bodysuit had been pulled to the side. The victim was cold to the touch and unresponsive. The victim's sisters had attempted to resuscitate her until paramedics arrived, but she was pronounced deceased on the scene. There were drag marks from the victim's shoes and fingers on the scene. Police recovered a condom in the car and semen was present. Private video surveillance and CTA surveillance captures this defendant wearing his distinguishable white jacket, exiting at the UIC Blue Line stop, following the victim down Taylor Street and into the parking garage. 35 minutes later, the defendant is captured on video running from the parking garage alone and then making his way through the UIC campus. This defendant's distinguishable white jacket was recovered from his home, and a palm print was recovered from the victim's vehicle that matched this defendant. On November 24th, UIC police had identified the defendant by face from the surveillance videos. They set up surveillance to see if the defendant would return to the area. On November 24th, the defendant did return to the area and he was placed in custody. The defendant made post-Miranda admissions where he stated that he choked the victim from behind and while she was unconscious, he threw her in the car. He stated that he then licked her vagina and digitally penetrated her vagina. The defendant denied that he had sexual intercourse with her, but he knew that his DNA would be all over the scene. Thank you.